Sound check. Check one, check two.
Oh, there we go. Zach, how you doing?
I'm doing really well, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
It is so good to have you on. You are my first. Did you know you're my first live guest for the year?
Oh wow, well, that's extra special.
It
Thank you.
it is. Thank you for being that person. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. But as you know, I just like hanging out with you. So um, you
That
know,
makes two of us.
good on you.
With you, not with me.
How has the last? Because has it been longer than 12 months since we had you on the show?
I think it was end of 2023. So
What
yeah,
end
since
of?
then
Okay, a little while. How has the last 15 months been for you?
it's been busy. Since then, our little boy was born just a couple months after I think we last spoke, and now he's almost 16 months and walking and teething, and we're all not sleeping too much. But it's a special time. It's awesome. Yeah.
We were talking pre-show, weren't we, and how you're entering the children years, and I'm currently in the process of exiting them. So we're
Mm.
yeah, but you're in for a wild ride, and you won't pass it up for anything in the world. The kids are wonderful.
It's the
Um,
best. Yeah.
they do rob you of a lot of sleep.
The evidence is right
Yeah,
here.
yeah, yeah. Yes, the bags will continue to fester. Um, when I came to you on a few weeks back and said, "Hey, let's come on the show again, and what do we want to talk about?" And I was tickled pink at the suggestion that we you wanted to talk about um, New Year's resolutions and how do we sustain those um this is a big kind of thing, I think, in the world of learning to sing. Let's I'm trying to think of how we best get into this subject. I'll get into it this way. I go to the gym. I go to the gym twice a week, and I've been doing so for a number of years, probably 4 or 5 years. And it's always interesting during January and February, and they're the 2 months of the year that I don't enjoy going to the gym because
Mhm.
there's too many people.
Yeah, yeah.
it's just you can't get onto the gear onto the there's just it's not easy access to the weights you want or whatever. And it was just in the last week or two, and it's always the same every year. It's just in the last week, and particularly this morning when I went, finally, we're starting to get to a point where it's not as busy. You know, those New Year's resolutions are really starting to wane for people who had set that goal for themselves at the beginning of the year to be more healthy, etc. I'm being very selfish in my observations here.
I get it.
For those people who are not going, I wish they would keep going. But you get my point, right?
I get it. Yeah, yeah.
Um, and having taught as long as you and I both have, I think we observe similar things happen for people in their practice strategies. Have you noted that sort of thing around their musical development, New Year's resolutions for the year?
Big time, big time. I think and it's something particularly when I was starting out, I struggled with myself. Is this idea that I've got a goal, it's a new year, or even if it's not a new year, and you're just starting out on your vocal journey. Maybe you're getting voice lessons for the first time, and you articulate a goal. I want to sing at an open mic night sometime later this year. The goal is there, the motivation is high, and okay, now what? I'm just going to practice what my teacher gave me. Or I'm going to practice something I found online. And the motivation can be a driver, often for people for maybe a few weeks or a couple of months, which is kind of like what we see with the gym thing in
Yeah.
January, February. And then eventually that motivation is going to fade, either because the goal is way off in the distance, or sometimes the person just goes and does the thing they set out to do. They do the open mic night, and now there's no goal, and so the motivation fades, and so does the desire to keep practicing. And yeah, so I see it in singing all the time. I think one of the major things is strategically developing systems and realistic systems that you can start and ultimately scale up. But you can start and just get really good at being consistent initially. So that's one of the things I see a lot, and one of the bits of advice I give to most students.
Yeah. I think the other challenge too I've observed is, often, particularly I'm thinking more so of beginner singers here, where there are a number of things that we can do with a brand new student that give quite almost instant gratification, because they are macro changes that give macro results very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so there can be a lot of immediate recognizable change, and that can happen in the first 4 or 5 lessons. But the further you get into technical development of the voice, we start to get into that refinement space, don't we? Where, yes, we're still adding new skills, but the changes take longer. It can take that longer journey to bed them down, for them to automate, and and so that I find that's where the going gets tough for a lot of people. Have you noticed a similar thing?
For sure, yeah. I think it's the gains that most people see in the first month or two, and maybe that you give them an SOVT, a lip trill or a straw phonation, and all of a sudden it feels so much more effortless, and there's more sound and so on. It's pretty hard not to notice that, for the singer and then for you as the teacher. But you're right. As time goes on, and let's assume the person is practicing consistently, they might continue to make gains, but they're going to be much more incremental. And so if the person's awareness isn't increasing, the kinesthetic and proprioceptive awareness isn't increasing at the same rate as their skill, then you as the teacher might be the only one noticing, they're still making gains, and they might not notice it, which can sometimes not, be a motivating or a driving force. So I think that's where we as teachers in lessons have to kind of champion and say, that lip trill or that whatever the thing is that you're working on was much more effective than the last one. You were smoother and you were pushing less or whatever it is.
Yes.
Because they might not be aware of it. One, because they're focused on the task and it's still somewhat new. But two, because it is much more of a micro change than they experienced in the first few weeks of training. So it's really important to help them heighten that awareness. You're asking questions and monitoring, recording the session, listening back, whatever you can do.
Yeah. I find that, to sort of graph it, if you will, we get this really steep learning experience in the first number of weeks, but then it starts to, and I'm yet to find a better word than plateau, because plateau for me always feels like we get a level, like a leveling out where there is no development. But in fact, it's just a much less steep learning curve, isn't it, for a lot of people? But you are still moving forward, you are still developing, and this, I guess, this is kind of the area that I want to sort of really deep dive. And you and I, before we started the show, we were talking about this book, because I've only just started to read it. Atomic Habits. And everyone, this was not planned in the lead up to today's show. I just happened to mention that I was reading it before. It turns out, and this is quite fortuitous, Zac has done a really, in-depth read of this book. And so I want to unpack it a little bit if we can, because I'm really only very early into the text, and already the author, James Clear, is what he is saying really resonates with my personal experience as a learner, but also my professional experience as a teacher, and that is, and I'm gonna really boil it down, like distill it into really cheap language. It's, well, in fact, he's got it here on the book. It's, let's use his words: tiny changes, remarkable results. And I've taken, because you can see how far I am in, right? Like, not very far. What do you think of my kids gave me that, right? Like a little.
Oh, that's cute.
Is that cute?
Oh,
Yeah.
ice cream?
It's a burger, actually.
Oh.
I think it's a burger.
Either way, it's cool.
I think it was one of those things like the Father's Day stalls at school. It's all ahead of you, Zac. The idea that it's all based in consistency, in showing up over the long term. Can you use that as a stepping stone into unpacking it a bit more for us, as someone who's really looked into it?
Sure, yeah. I think let's start there with the small steps. I think one of the big mistakes, again, I've made this mistake many times, particularly early on, and I see people making all the time, is through eagerness, they start voice training, and maybe they're getting a lesson, 30-minute lesson or 1 hour lesson once a week, once every 2 weeks, and they think, well, I'm going to practice the things that I did in that lesson, the 30 minutes or the 1 hour, and I'm going to do it 5 or 6 days a week. And if you're starting without a practice habit at all, you've never had a singing practice habit, and then you try to jump right to that, for most people, again, motivation will help them maybe sustain it for 2-3 weeks, maybe a month or two if they're really driven. But if they haven't established, I guess, a habit that's more incremental, then likely as soon as life gets busy or motivation fades, that kind of falls apart. So James Clear, he states, there's a really good framework for thinking about the different things that you can do to establish and sustain a lasting practice habit. And I think one of the big picture things before getting into any of those kind of parts of the framework is that he talks about the fact that goals are excellent for setting direction, but systems and habits are essential for progress.
Yeah.
And so I think in our modern culture, we tend to focus on goals and results, and we're less focused on processes and building a lifestyle and the things that take more time and effort. So that's kind of the one things he talks about, is really establishing those habits, and then underlying that he really emphasizes having clarity around a positive identity or mindset around who you are as a singer, and allowing that to be one of the drivers of maintaining and building a practice habit, so that you can reach your goals, but you're not solely relying on the motivation of the goal to keep your engine going.
Can we just for a moment talk about that identity point, because he does really make a point of that, certainly in the chapters that I've already read, about saying, for to be specific to us, I'm not a person who sings, I'm a singer, and he really drives that point home. And because I'm a singer, I behave accordingly. I'm not a person who has externalized this identity, but I'm actually owning it and grounding it. What did you take away from that aspect of what he has to say?
Yeah, well, again, as someone who for a long time, I was gigging professionally in my late teens, early 20s, and I didn't consider myself a singer. I considered myself a good musician and guitarist, but I wasn't a very good practicer. I performed a lot, but wasn't a good practicer. And so because I was comparing myself to those who were practicing and being more dedicated to their craft and technique and so on, I thought, well, I'm not really a singer because I'm not doing those things. So for me, I think when I started to consider myself a singer was in my mid-20s, and it was really, I was actually performing less, but I was more consistent with my practice, and my technical growth really started to move a lot faster. So I love what he says in the book about the idea that each time you go out to practice or do something that's part of your habit, whether it's performing or rehearsing, or it could be any aspect of that, each action that you take towards this identity is a vote that you're casting to reinforce that identity. So at first you might say, well, I'm a singer dedicated to the craft of singing, and yet if you're just starting out and you haven't practiced and whatnot, you might feel like a bit of a fraud. Not the case. but it becomes, I think, easy to own that identity as you start to live it out. And then that identity, as it becomes stronger, again, acts as fuel for the habit, which then will help you to reach the goals that you set, but also it'll help you to build a system that ultimately will help you to achieve goals you haven't even yet set. So I think that's the key thing, is having a clarity around a positive identity for yourself.
What do you think is one of the, well, we don't have to narrow it down to one effective way of doing this, but how do we make, and we've just talked about identity for one, how do we make our practice sticky? Like, and I put that on the thumbnail, how to develop sticky practice or whatever I said, because it is going to get, I'm going to use the word, it at times is going to be boring. Isn't it? Like, there are going to be times where you front up, if you've fronted up to practice, and you don't want to be there. Like, what can we do to motivate ourselves and propel ourselves through those times that will come?
Well, yeah, again, I'm going to reference James Clear because I think he's laid it out in a really clear way. The four kind of main parts of the framework that he talks about are that in order to have a lasting practice habit, you want to make your habit or your practice habit, you want to make it really obvious, you want to make it attractive, you want to make it easy, and you want to make it satisfying. So the first one of those is obvious. If you're wanting to practice every day, but your microphone and your sheet music and all the things that you use to practice are hidden away, then it's not going to be so obvious. So designing your space, if you practice in your home office or your living room, you might set those things up the night before so that when you wake up, there it is. You see everything that you need to practice. You can also make it obvious by using one of his strategies, habit stacking. So habit stacking is where you take an existing habit, such as brushing your teeth. Hopefully you do that every day in the morning when you wake up. And you say, okay, after said habit, brushing my teeth, I'm going to practice. And then, you might have to think about that for a week or two, but eventually it becomes this automatic thing where you wake up, you have a shower, you eat your breakfast, you brush your teeth, and then you do your singing warm-ups. And so you want to make that automatic by attaching it to a string of habits that you already do. The third one is making it easy. This really is one of the key important ones, I find, because in order to practice consistently or to want to practice, you want to reduce friction. Life is so busy and has so many distractions that we have to be really intentional, I think, deliberate about not just what we do in practice itself, but just getting to the practice space to show up. So I think time is probably one of the big friction points for a lot of people.
Yes.
And so I love his 2-minute rule. He says the 2-minute rule is where you take whatever the habit, in our case, singing practice, and you boil it down to the 2-minute version. And when I tell students that, they laugh, they go, that's ridiculous. To practice for 2 minutes, what's the point? And James Clear's point is that if you show up and you can get really good at showing up to 2 minutes of practice, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 days a week, and you can do that for 2 or 3 weeks with only missing 1 or 2 sessions, then what you're doing is you're getting good at mastering the art of showing up to practice, which then ultimately, even sooner than a month, hopefully you're scaling that up to maybe 3 minutes or 5 minutes. But ultimately, you're going to scale that up to something that you're probably going to see more significant changes in. But you can't really optimize a practice habit that doesn't exist. So the key is to establish it first.
I really like that concept of removing friction. And I find, for me, I actually really love practice. But I want to go back to my personal experience currently of the gym. I love going to the gym. Sorry, I'm going to rephrase that. I love being at the gym, but the friction point for me is I have to get in my car and drive to the gym at 5:20 on a Monday and a Thursday morning. And so I've done things to try and help reduce that friction. So I have habits of I put a drink in the fridge the night before, and I also get my clothes out and
Yeah.
and have them ready, out of all ready to go at the end of my bed, so that when I get up partly so I don't wake my wife up, but also so that it's less friction. And you think, well, they're little things, opening your drawer, yeah, but it's surprising how just removing all of those little friction points, isn't it? That it really does help me get to the gym. And like I said, once I'm there, I'm fine. I actually quite enjoy it. The same was when I was doing my doctorate. The hardest part for me to sit and study and write my doctorate was literally moving from the lounge room, which is behind that door, and sitting here in front of the computer and actually doing the work. Once I was doing the work, I actually quite enjoyed it. So I find that for a lot of people, myself included, as I've just expressed, it is that habit of, how did James Clear put it? The showing up habit.
Master the art of showing up. Yeah.
The art of showing up. I think if you can really nail that, remove all of the frictions involved, and really think about it through step by step, and you can really identify those things quite clearly to remove all of that friction so that you can really get into it.
Big time. Again, you're not going to want to practice if it's difficult.
Yeah.
And it might be time, or for a lot of people, it's the fact that they don't want to practice when they know that their roommates or their mum or whoever is in the next room, and they have this fear that they might be judged in some way.
Yeah.
And so one of the other big things they can change to make it easy is to time their practice, ideally when not many people are in the house or no one's in the home. Or if they have the ability to practice somewhere else, like a community hall, a church hall, is find somewhere where there's no friction. You feel like you can make sound, you can make mistakes, and like you said with the gym, somewhere maybe that's on the way home from work, so you're not having to drive out of your way. You want to be strategic with these things so that there's as little barrier to entry as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I guess, this kind of returns to the idea of identity, but I want to explore it from the viewpoint of mindset. What role do you think mindset plays in establishing these habits, and being able to travel that long road?
Yeah, well, one of the big buzzwords is the growth mindset, which as opposed to the mindset which you hear a lot about, and I think there's good reason for that. But one of the best examples that James Clear uses in the book around this is two people get asked the same question. Both people have a history of smoking, and when the first one is offered a cigarette, they say, "No, I'm trying to quit smoking." And then the second person gets offered a cigarette and they say, "No, I'm not a smoker." And obviously the first person is focusing on the goal, they're striving to change their habit. And then the second person has made the decision that they're not a smoker anymore. Now, I think that kind of highlights, in a really powerful way, by changing how you think of yourself, that can give you the power to feel like, I can grow, I can change. If you're really trying to fight against something, but your identity is still grounded in this old habit, sure, maybe you can make some change, largely driven by motivation, but the voice in our head speaks pretty loudly. So I think often we can remove a lot of friction in here if we are intentional about that. We reinforce that when we answer the question. One of the questions I get asked a lot at parties is, so you're a vocal coach, can you sing? And I jokingly say these days, I hope so. But
you'd like to think so.
You'd like to think so, yeah. But I used to say, I really need to practice more. I want to get better. I'm okay. And I think that played into me not wanting to fully commit to delving into practice, because I thought, well, if I do that, then I'm really going to be vulnerable. If I say I'm not practicing and I just kind of do it as a side thing to my guitar playing or whatever it was, it felt a little bit safer. But I think mindset plays a huge role in giving you the belief that, I can do this. And when things get rough, it can also help you not to feel so bad if you don't achieve a goal in the time you set out to, or you miss a practice session, because you go, it's okay, I'm going to do it tomorrow because I'm the type of person who's intentional about singing being a part of my lifestyle, as opposed to everything hinging on the goal happening at the right time, or every practice
Yeah.
point happening exactly to plan, you can give yourself a little bit more space because that's not the only thing that you're thinking about.
I allow me to play the devil's advocate for a moment, because
Go for it.
I think well, I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for you on this. I think I know. Anyway, the point I was going to make is I am actually generally my personality is very structured. My general character makeup is one of enjoying structure, habit, sometimes to the point of error. My wife is constantly saying, Daniel, it doesn't need to be exactly the same. Yeah, well, I like it when it's exactly the same. So I recognize that my personality leans into this. Like I like it. There might be some people watching this going, yes, but I'm a more free spirit. I'm more creative. I don't want to just, I want to go with the flow. I don't want to be, you know, tied down to certain things. What do you say to that? Like, recognizing that we are all different.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the person and where they are in their journey. I think that the identity thing can't hurt, there's nothing bad that's going to happen by having a positive self identity or clarifying that. But I think with regards to the discipline and building the systems, if you're wanting to sing as a hobby for fun, maybe you want to join a community choir or do karaoke a few times a year or just sound better singing Happy Birthday, then obviously you want to develop a system that is going to help you achieve what you want to achieve and not get you stuck in any way. So that's going to look very different than the person who maybe is doing a college program or is a pre-professional or a professional and they're gigging 5 times a week. So the level of discipline and routine is obviously going to be much more detailed for the second person. So I think you have to tailor it to the individual. You've got to tailor how it fits into the lifestyle, among many other things. But also within practice sessions, you're obviously tailoring the types of exercises, the amount of repertoire. So all that has to be tailored to the person based on their stage, but also their personality.
Yeah.
So I think there is a lot of room to lessen, the amount of detail in the systems. And honestly, when I read the book, I was overwhelmed because there were so many strategies with all these main 4 points that we talked about and tactics. And I went, oh crap, I've got to implement all these at once. And I think he says in the book, he's like, don't do that. Pick one thing in this chapter and then start with that.
And zero
And
in
so
on.
I think that's, I would boil it down even more simply. If you've read the book or you're taking anything that we're talking about here, is take one thing and just try to implement that for a while and see if that helps you to
Yeah.
have a more enjoyable and productive practice
I
time.
I literally had, I kid you not, this exact conversation with my student prior to, well, it was my 11 o'clock this morning. She's a relative, not young mum, as in she's got her children a little bit older than yours. She is coming to lessons and has only just recently started having lessons purely for her. It's her opportunity to get, well, she has her own business, but get out of the business, get out of doing mum stuff and just lessons for her. And we were talking about the importance to not allow, and this is almost going to sound like it's the exact opposite of what we've been talking about, but the importance of not allowing practice to become guilt-ridden. That, to not, I said to her, don't ever show up to lessons feeling guilty that you didn't get practice done, because for her, that's not what this is about. This is about her having an hour once a fortnight to step completely outside of her normal existence. And we go through the same process as everyone else. It's technically focused singing lessons and we sing, material at the end and yada yada. But I said, don't ever front up. I'm not waiting here going, I wonder if she's practiced this week. I've been losing sleep over it. And I really encouraged her to make sure her orientation towards the singing remained guilt-free. And I can see how today's discussion could do what we don't want it to do, and that is laden people with a sense of guilt that they perhaps are not even where they want to be in the regards to the topic we're discussing. How does a person make sure that this doesn't become something that's driven by guilt? Incidentally, I wanted to add to that before you answer the question. I did say to her, if you were one of my professional students, as in a gigging singer, I would be saying something very different to you right now.
Yes, it's a different conversation.
It would be This would be a different conversation, but it isn't you, because you are not, and therefore we need to respond to you as an individual. Anyway, back. How can we make sure that the guilt is not, because it can really erode, what we're looking for.
I agree with you totally. I think part of it is just by stating it and having that conversation, because people often do put too much pressure on themselves, and it is one of the big mistakes is people trying to do too much too soon, and they do it out of wanting to please the teacher, or they do it because that's what they feel like they need to do. And so I think that part of the whole identity mindset thing is kind of looking and going, now what am I doing this for? I love to sing. I'm a busy parent. I have a job. I have other commitments. This is something I want to do for joy. And I think as time goes on, let's say there isn't a practice habit, but the person is just happy showing up to a lesson or going to choir once every week, I think then often practice comes about, or it can come about because of a pain point. The person is doing that thing, they're showing up to the lesson, they're seeing changes in the lesson, but then they're not seeing much growth outside of that. And so the pain point of, I really want to progress faster, can be something that the person goes, what do I do next?
Yes.
And maybe the person is practicing the right, or when they do practice once or whatever a week, they're practicing the right things, but maybe the issue is that they need to not worry about doing 1 hour on a Saturday, but they need to have spaced practice where they're doing 10 minutes, 5 or 6 days a week. So they just need to change the way it looks so that they might be doing the exact same amount of practice time, but they're going to see more gains. Yeah. It'll feel more manageable and less pressure. And then again, if they miss one, they're aiming for 5 days, they've got 2 other days they can make it up. And so there's wiggle room. I think you want to find ways to create margin in that whole setup, so that the person goes, well, if I miss it, it's not the end of the world.
I often refer to that as learning to manage the model. So the model is we a beginner singer, I'm wanting them to practice every second day, and the time lengths vary. But how a person outworks that into their own life has to be managed in accordance. The model has to be managed in accordance to the individual, because everyone's life is structured differently. And not everyone is going to be able to structure that, Saturday 1 hour practice. For some people, they're going to have to do it differently. I also, just being aware of time, because we're coming towards the end, I also want to just very briefly talk about, as people are going along that long-term journey. So we're no longer talking about beginners. I'm talking about singers who, okay, well, I've been doing this for a few years now. I continue to show up. But over that time, the person changes, their life circumstance can change, their reason for having lessons can change. And I often talk about this idea of there are different points in our lives where we need to renegotiate with ourselves our reason for doing the singing thing. I know I've had to do it. I had a 25 plus year professional singing career. I no longer have that. I no longer am doing that. My focus has shifted now, and yet singing remains a really integral part of my personal life beyond my teaching. and I've had to renegotiate that space. What advice can you give to singers who are walking that path where they come to these forks in the road, if you will, these points of change?
Yeah, well, again, I think that if you look at it in the bigger sense, if the lifestyle is changing, like mine has in the last year, where I'm performing a lot less, still teaching a lot, and trying to be, been quite consistent with practice for the most part. In my head, I've had to make that change and say, well, I'm not performing as much at the moment, and yet I still want to keep singing going. One, because it brings me joy. One, it enriches my teaching and it helps me to be more empathetic with students who are learning new things.
Yes.
But ultimately, if I do choose to perform again, which I will at some point, more frequently, then I'm going to have a technique that's ready to do that, and I won't feel like I'm starting all over it, in a sense. So I think that there's that aspect, but depending on where the person is, I think they've got to be clear about, what stage of life, what's realistic. Often people have goals that maybe aren't realistic, either because they don't have enough time to commit to it, or because it's beyond the area they are in their vocal journey. And so I think having real conversations with trusted teachers and coaches and family members and say, you know what, let's alter that goal to something that's realistic with your lifestyle, so that you are still enjoying the process, and you are you're reaching these kind of milestones, these goals that will bring you joy, but will also feel like a win in the sense that it'll help you to build momentum towards the next thing. And it might mean you've got to have a few stepping stone goals to get to that big goal now that your lifestyle has changed, or now that singing is playing a different role in your life because of circumstance changes. So I think, just sometimes having the tough conversation with ourselves, but also having that with a trusted person who's done it before and is maybe at least a few steps ahead, if not many steps ahead of you in that.
Yeah, we never want the process to devolve into something that is toxic, do we? I think sometimes I do say to students, I ask them to take a moment to remember why they started this in the first place.
Yep.
What was it that made you, in the case of singing lessons, what was it that made you pick up the phone and call me?
Yeah.
What was that? And actually, I just remembered one story from last year. The thing that made one particular student was he was drunk with friends, and he was out drunk with friends, and they said, "What are you doing with your life?" And he said, I don't know. And they said, "Well, you should, haven't you always wanted to sing?" And so, while they were at the pub, he literally booked his first consultation lesson.
That would have been a phone call. Yeah.
That is the exception, I'm glad to report, not the rule. Because when I will admit his lesson journey wasn't very long. At least he left me with a good story. Anyway, as we come close to wrapping up, are there any other, because we are at the end of February, and like I've observed in my my local gym, those New Year's resolutions are really starting to wear and tear. What would you like to, as an encouragement, what would you like to leave people with to encourage them towards these tiny changes, over time? What would you want to say to them?
I would say to them, continue to have goals, but it can sound like what I'm saying is don't have goals. You need to just think about practice and so on. So have goals, have clarity around them. Ideally, kind of test out of these realistic goals for where I'm at, but start small and really find one thing that you can do that's going to help you to practice more consistently. Even if it's 2 minutes or 5 minutes, a few times a week, something that's going to help you to move the ball along so that as you continue on your journey, you feel like you're taking these steps that encourage you to keep taking more steps, because these tiny little changes over time have a big, large compounding effect. And again, I think one of the big things that most of us do, I know I've done it, is we bite off more than we can chew, and then we feel deflated when we can't maintain, an hour a day, 5 days a week. So I think that would be one of the big things. And again, just not relying too much on motivation alone. What's the famous saying? It's the 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. I think, really, for wherever you're at, kind of find a way that you can make practice fun, make practice consistent, even if it's a short amount, and enjoy the process so that you can head towards the goals that you want to reach.
Yeah. And I want to add to that, because everything you just said is awesome. Let me add to encourage people to seek to be mindful in their practice. And I think the moment any task becomes just a well, in the case of singing practice, if you've got in my lessons, you get given exercise tracks to practice with. If all you're doing is hitting play and just by rote going through them, it's not that won't do you any good, but it certainly will lack a level of enjoyment. Whereas if you remain mindful and present in the practice, and I'll often say to students, when I see them in a lesson, what did you experience in your practice? What did you learn about your voice this week? What? Because I think, we do, and it's not to say that we have epiphanies every single practice session, but there are moments where we experience things, but we can only really take those on board and really, really deep dive into those if we've been mindful. Otherwise, they do pass us by. And I think that sense of mindfulness can create a curiosity that propels us forward as well, because we almost we're seeking out those moments that are going to be in the future, and that can give you that sense of momentum in your practice. So yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and I'm so glad that pre-show that I happened to mention I was reading it because there is. And I'm literally only 4 chapters in or something, and yet I know already, and look, I know this because it's been an international bestseller, and there's a reason for it. It's such good stuff, and it's simple stuff too, isn't it, Zac? Like it's not rocket science.
No, he makes it clear, and again, he references a lot of research. There's a lot of good things behind what he's saying, but he tells a lot of stories and uses narrative, but he just simplifies, these things that you can apply to your singing. You can apply it to other music-related things like learning an instrument or musical theory or whatever it is, and he makes it tangible, so it's easy to take actionable steps.
Yes.
So I highly recommend the book. It's awesome.
Yeah, highly recommend, either as a cover to cover or an audio book. I'm sure as it would translate really well for audio for those people who like to do it that way. Not sponsored. There you go, James. We've just promoted your already overly successful book on voice essentials. It'll skyrocket to universal success now. Zac, it has been so cool to hang out once again, and as I share with you, I just love hanging out with you, and we're in the same city, but we you do live on the north side. There is that,
You live on the south side, yeah.
That's right. And for those who don't know, in Brisbane, if you live on the south side, you hardly go to the north side, and vice versa. It's kind of it's a thing. It is a thing. I think a lot of cities have that, don't they? Like,
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's not.
In Sydney, you're either from the Shire, or you're from the Northern Beaches, or from Western Sydney, and never the twain shall meet kind of deal. I hope you've enjoyed today's live hangout, everyone. Have you got anything to leave us with to finish, Zac?
No, just thank you for having me, and I love talking about this topic because it's something that really can change lives. Where when you take action on again
Yeah.
one simple thing, like being mindful and deliberate. If you've been practicing mindlessly while scrolling on your phone, just making that one change
Yeah.
can make all the difference, and you can feel like you've infused new life into your
Yeah.
singing journey and your practice. So, yeah, I think it's something to keep thinking about, keep talking about, keep reading about.
Thanks, mate. It was good to have you.
Thanks, Dan.
There you go, folks. I mean, it is. I'm hoping that today's discussion, and it was just quite fortuitous that the topic, Zac recommended the topic for us to discuss for this point in the year, and it comes around every year, doesn't it? Because I'm hoping that it really motivates and propels you forward into the remainder. There's another 10 months to go for 2025. I'm hoping it propels you forward with really productive practice so that by the end of 2025, you can look back and go, wow, with really consistent, intentional showing up week in, week out, you'll be able to look back and see your progress mapped out. It'll be incremental, but it will be there. And that's what I'm hoping for you all. I hope you've enjoyed today's live hangout. And I think we've just set the bar really high for our special guest for the year. We do have another special guest who I'm holding on. I'm not telling you who it will be in 2 weeks' time. We're going to be having that person join us. Remember, next week we are going to be having Laura is going to be our first ever community analysis video. So I'm hoping you'll join us for that. And I do hope you have a great week. And we'll see you next week. Oh, leave a thumbs up on the video if you can today. That would be awesome. I look forward to seeing you next week. I'm Dr. Dan. Sing well.